This video essay will be dealing with some pretty graphic material, so I just want to put that warning. If you're okay with that, let us proceed. This is going to be a difficult essay because we're judging three male writers, Mark, Joss, and Zach. I'm going to bring in George Martin. So what is the issue? Well, essentially, Mark Millar had an idea in the early 90s, and this is during the time of the death of Superman, as well as Nightfall, where Batman's back is broken. And they had a similar idea to sort of show the hero in an extreme physical state, and this was Wonder Woman, and he proposed an idea called the rape of Wonder Woman. Now, in of itself, there's nothing wrong here. If you want to pursue any topic as a writer, I think you should be free to do so. I'm usually somebody who thinks you should be given absolute freedom and there shouldn't be judgment about what a writer chooses. However, as he admits, and if you look at his larger body of work, he sort of just did it as a joke, right? He didn't really care about the subject at all. He just wanted to do something that was very shocking and graphic and just thought about it as kind of a joke. And it almost did happen, but people inside Warner Brothers and DC decided it would just be too much, and the comic was never done, but they were going to do it. Now, overall, I think if you look at Millar's work, and I don't want to do a hit piece, he is a sort of interesting, strange case where he does show a lot of graphic, extreme material, but paradoxically, it's pro-queer, right? There's a lot of queer representation in his books. On the other hand, he's not always pro-feminist, and so it's a really interesting dichotomy that even though he tries to depict people of all kinds, shapes, and sizes and all that, it's often in very extreme physical, emotional, even ethical state. But again, it's not done with, I think, a corresponding seriousness, and that's fine if that's his style. But I think with somebody like George Martin, because Martin has sort of been accused of the same thing, of just using rape as an allegory too lightly and just using it for shock value to entice the male reader or just for sensationalism. And he said over and over again that, yes, while there is a lot of rape that occurs in A Song of Ice and Fire, it's not being done for any kind of joking. It is to show how omnipresent, threatening, and overwhelming warfare is, and that rape of women in particular does occur a lot in warfare, as do atrocities against civilians. So there's no glorification, and it may be an extreme use of this, but that's the point of it. It's to show that war is not a joke. If you initiate warfare, it will bring with it a huge amount of atrocities and ugly evils, including rape of women. And we can't get around that. You have to show it. Now, obviously, it's not as extreme when we turn to Zack Snyder and Joss Whedon, even though you can sort of say in certain cases that the issue of warfare is being brought up. And they haven't depicted rape per se, but they have sometimes played with the issue of sexual violation by superheroes or with superheroes here and there. Joss more prominently in Buffy, Angel, Firefly, Dollhouse, and of course the Avengers movies he directed. And as examples of his alleged leering attitude, people bring in, of course, what happened with Spike and Buffy, the use of Jubal early in Firefly and Objects in Space, and of course Black Widow in Avengers and how she was depicted. But several qualifications are needed. For one thing, Joss was himself not always present when these things happened. It was written by other people. With Buffy and Angel, he does deserve some responsibility because, again, he was shaping these shows intimately. But with the Avengers work, he's made clear he worked with a lot of restrictions. And although Scarlett Johansson has a lot of criticism of how Black Widow was used, she really doesn't talk about Joss Whedon per se. In fact, she sort of sidesteps Joss Whedon, so it's unclear that Joss himself is the target of these criticisms. Also, despite what people think, Joss himself did address this issue very precisely. He wasn't talking about Black Widow, but he was answering the issue of Echo and Dollhouse and how, well, essentially this is just a super heroine with very tight clothing, often seen very sexually alluring, and essentially it's just for the male audience, and there's nothing else going on with the character. And Joss was very quick to say, no, we were very careful in that, in the way we're depicting her, that there is a kind of limit. So even though we do see Echo in very bad situations, and we do see her being beat up, he never wanted it to be the case that he was fetishizing sexual violence against her, or that the audience would take it that way. If the audience did take it that way with Black Widow or Echo or Buffy, that's something that the audience is bringing to the table, but was not intentional in terms of the scripts. Of course, with these things, you can never tell, but it's very clear, though, that there is no evidence that when rape is being used, yes, it may have a dark humor by the rapist, which we're not supposed to agree with or like, but I don't think I've ever found where Whedon says he did it as a joke, right? So rape and sexual violence, something he's very careful when he's using, that it's being done seriously, even if, quote, the person doing it is sort of charming or has a weird sense of humor, etc., etc. But that's part of the character. But in terms of the writer, it's not meant to be taken as something that is, quote, delightful. or anything that's enjoyable. Now, Zack, I think, is unfortunately a both good and happy case where we've never seen anything that extreme. We've seen heroes and heroines being extremely violent, and he's either through sheer luck or just happenstance, he helped produce Wonder Woman, and I'm not in love with it as much as other people. I think Patty Jenkins' interpretation of Wonder Woman is fine, but I don't think it's definitive, and I did think they lost actually a little bit of the feminist edge that Wonder Woman represents. But overall, it's a pretty good depiction. And so we get pretty good Wonder Woman in his movies, whether Batman versus Superman or the so-called Snyder Cut. We don't see anything comparable to Buffy or Game of Thrones or anything like that. And the one case people do bring against him is Sucker Punch, where he sees, or Watchmen, right, with the comedian. And people say he's depicting rape in a sort of misogynistic fashion from a sexist point of view. The problem there is that these are really just accusations. They don't bring any real textual evidence, nor even visual evidence. They just presuppose he's doing that in these scenes, but I've yet to find convincing evidence. Or like Mark Millar, somebody who casually admits, well, yeah, I'm doing shocking stuff, but I don't really care about it. I don't think Zack has said that. In fact, he's often said the opposite, that when he's making allusions to 9/11, he's being very serious and he's trying to take it seriously. It is true that both Joss and Zack have a very dark sense of humor, as do George Martin and Mark Millar, but I think it's the way they're treating these specific subjects. There's still a very wide difference, and with Sucker Punch in particular, we don't know what's happening, really imply a sexist viewpoint or a sexist agenda. It may be there, but I've not found any explicit evidence that Snyder intended this. So this is something, again, the audience is reading into both him and Joss's work. So bottom line, Mark is looking the worst here in that he's using sexual violence mainly for sensationalism within the story. Now, I defend him that he thinks it's naturalistic to that story and it's justified. That's fine, but I do think we want to kind of observe a kind of George Martin rule that we want to be careful when we pull that out. So on the one hand, yes, writers should be given absolute freedom to do whatever they please, but then there's also the corresponding absolute right to be criticized for that writing, and you have to take that seriously, or else I think the trade-off we're talking about in depicting Wonder Woman being raped, well, what are we getting out of it if we're just getting a cheap joke? I just don't see what's the strong justification. You can do it, but I don't know how it would be defensible, and that's my take on these issues. All right, this has been a difficult video essay on the issue of sexual violence, women, and the superhero genre. Thank you for listening.